Greetings, welcome to Facts About Everything. I'm your host, James Egan. Today we're going to look at the DC supervillain, Mr. Freeze. Special thanks to David Taylor for asking me to do a video about Mr. Freeze. Thanks, David, and as always, keep your suggestions coming. I will do everything in my power to avoid doing cold puns, but if one slips out, just chill out. The sad thing is, a lot of people think Mr. Freeze is a dumb villain just because of the Batman and Robin movie. And to be perfectly honest, many comic book readers thought the same thing. He was a completely forgettable generic villain for decades. He only became one of Batman's most popular foes when he appeared in the cartoon Batman the Animated Series.
To never again walk on a summer's day with a hot wind in your face. Oh yes, I'd kill for that.
Many people know that Mr. Freeze's thing is he's trying to get money to cure his dying wife who is cryonically frozen. But a lot of people didn't realize that that story was not in the comics. Mr. Freeze didn't have a backstory. He was just a guy with a nice gun. That was it. This story was created for the cartoon Batman the Animated Series. In fact, this episode was so spectacular that it won an Emmy for outstanding writing in an animated series. That's right, the backstory for Mr. Freeze was so good, it actually got Batman to win an Emmy. And that is the first fact about Mr. Freeze. Let's dive in. Mr. Freeze debuted in Batman number 121 in 1959. However, he was originally known as Mr. Zero. He didn't become known as Mr. Freeze until the 1960s. His real name is Victor Freeze. What are the chances that's your surname? It's also spelled as Fries, so that's just confusing. Victor Freeze was not the first supervillain to be known as Mr. Freeze. A Mr. Freeze robot debuted 2 years prior in Black Hawk number 117. He only made one appearance. Although Mr. Freeze usually wears a blue and white uniform, his first costume was green and pink. Mr. Freeze is a doctor of cryonics, which is the freezing of people, and cryogenics, which is the freezing of inanimate objects. The word cryogenics is often used incorrectly when referred to cryonics. I have to point this out because I'm going to say cryonics a lot, and you're going to go, you can't pronounce cryogenics. When he was a child, Victor used to walk on ice with his mother during the winter. One day, the ice cracked and Victor's mother fell into the icy water. This traumatized him and he developed an unhealthy obsession with ice. Although his mother survived the accident, she was confined to a wheelchair. By this point, poor Victor's mind had already become warped from the experience. He brought his mother back to the icy region and dropped her to her death into the freezing water. This caused Victor to develop an obsession with cryonics. He used to freeze animals to see if he could bring them back to life. He also used to find animals and freeze different parts of their, what he called, specimen, and watch how it affected each one. He was fascinated how birds would die after they lost a single toe. When Victor's father learned of this, he had Victor institutionalized. His psychiatrist concluded that Victor's obsession with freezing things was his attempt to impose control. Okay, let's look at the moment that turned Victor into Mr. Freeze. Victor learned that his wife, Nora, was dying, so he cryonically froze her using a freeze ray, hoping that he would find a cure in the future. His boss tampered with the experiment, causing an explosion. The chemicals from the freeze ray left Victor in a state where he could only survive in sub-zero temperatures. Freeze must wear a chronic suit at all times to survive. It is powered by diamonds. Freeze usually robs banks, hoping he can raise enough money to complete his research and thus find a cure for his wife. He will kill anyone that stands in his way. The character was created by Dave Wood, Sheldon Moldoff, and Bob Kane. Sheldon created Hawkman and Hopgirl, and Bob Kane created Batman. Mr. Freeze is most well known for his weapon, the freeze ray. You'd be surprised to learn that freeze rays actually exist. Scientists at Nanyang Technological University have created a laser that can slow down atoms if it is fired at the correct frequency. You see, temperature is determined by the speed of atoms, so the slower the atoms move in an object, the colder the object will be. Absolute zero is the coldest an object can theoretically be, because at that point the atoms literally stop moving, and you can't move slower than stopping completely. So far, this laser can freeze an object from 62 degrees Celsius to well below zero in seconds. In one story, Batman tracked down a mysterious masked killer and eventually learned that it was Mr. Freeze. This revelation perplexed Batman because Mr. Freeze hasn't hidden his murders in the past. Batman learned that when Freeze's wife learned she was terminally ill, she and Victor became desperate for a cure. As a result, they attacked bystanders on the street and harvested their organs so Nora could have a life-saving transplant. Sadly, her body rejected the organs and Freeze was forced to put her in cryostasis. Freeze killed anyone who could implicate Nora with the murders. Although Freeze doesn't care what people think of him, he could not have his wife's reputation destroyed by her crimes. Batman promised Freeze that he would never divulge the truth about Nora to anyone. Nora was eventually resurrected by a mystical Lazarus Pit, which is what Ra's al Ghul uses to give himself prolonged life. When Nora returned to life, the pit left her unstable and she became a supervillainess called Lazara. Lazara has the ability to summon fire and raise the dead. Lazara blamed her husband for her transformation. This left Freeze utterly heartbroken and he was forced to place her back into cryostasis. Let's look at the actors who played Mr. Freeze. This is going to be fun. He is played by 3 different actors in the 1966 TV series Batman. Otto Preminger, who played the director in Anatomy of a Murder.
Clear your trays and fill them up with real goodies. Wild!
George Sanders, who voiced Shere Khan in The Jungle Book.
I am sorry, Batman. I wanted to toy with you a little longer. But that is the way the ice cube crumbles.
And Eli Wallach, who played Tuco in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Soon I'll be able to cover the entire world with an instant ice cap.
But they all pale compared to the greatest and most respected depiction of Mr. Freeze ever. You know the actor I'm talking about. The one, the only, Michael Ansara from Batman the Animated Series.
I can only beg your forgiveness and pray you'll hear me somehow, someplace.
And nobody ever played Mr. Freeze ever again. Mr. Freeze could briefly shoot ice from his body and did not rely on his freeze ray. In 2013, IGN's top 100 comic book villains of all time ranked Mr. Freeze at number 66. Mr. Freeze almost never works for other villains. If he does, it is only for money to advance his research. His cryonic suit is bulletproof. To stop him relying on his cryonic suit, Mr. Freeze once tried to create a worldwide ice age. The coolants that turned him into Mr. Freeze slow down his aging and give him super strength. His body temperature is 5 degrees Celsius. A normal body temperature is 37.1 degrees Celsius. If he's exposed to any temperature above sub-zero, he will boil alive. He needs to wear goggles at all times or his eyes will freeze. In the DC universe, his wife Nora is supposed to be the first person ever to be cryonically frozen. The Batman comics rebooted in the year 2012. In this version, it is unveiled that Nora has never met or spoken to Victor. She was cryonically frozen in 1966 due to a heart condition, and her story inspired Freeze to become a cryonic scientist. He became so obsessed with her that he convinced himself she was the love of his life. In the Spanish version of Batman the Animated Series, Mr. Freeze is called Captain Frio, which translates into Captain Cold. This is a bit confusing because there's another DC supervillain called Captain Cold. Also, let me know if you want me to do a video about Captain Cold. He is one of the bosses in the game Batman Arkham City. Not only is he considered to be the best boss in any of the games, Mr. Freeze is one of the best video game bosses ever. This is because there's about 12 to 15 ways to hurt him, like hide under a vent and then when he comes up, just knock him up, or activate an electromagnet which will draw him in and you can batter him. Stuff like that. But every time you do one of those ways, he disables that technique. You hit under the ventilation shaft, he rips it open. You use that electric magnet, he destroys it. So he learns by your technique, so you can't use the same technique twice. If you don't have the game, look it up on YouTube. It's absolutely amazing. It is probably the best boss I've ever seen in a video game. Okay, let's look at Batman and Robin. He is played by Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 1997 film Batman Robin.
All right, everyone. Chill.
To date, no one has ever figured out why he did not win an Oscar. Chris O'Donnell, who plays Robin, didn't work with Arnold Schwarzenegger for one single day making this movie. In their scenes, O'Donnell always worked with Schwarzenegger's stunt double. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't take this seriously. Even when I'm looking for clips for the movie, I'm still finding plot holes that make no sense. Why is he wearing slippers and a dressing gown if he needs to stay cold to survive? Why is he smoking a cigar when that's going to make him warm? This movie makes no sense! Schwarzenegger had heart surgery immediately after making this movie. He couldn't find work for 2 years. Yes, that was the reason why you couldn't find work. Mr. Freeze's costume weighs 75 pounds. Despite the fact Arnold is obviously incredibly strong, he found the suit really heavy and said it was suffocating. As I've mentioned in my Arnold Schwarzenegger video, Mr. Freeze was nearly played by Hulk Hogan or Anthony Hopkins. The director chose Schwarzenegger for the role of Mr. Freeze because he looked like he was chiseled out of a glacier. Despite the fact Schwarzenegger is the most memorable thing in this movie, he only worked on it for 6 weeks. Schwarzenegger was paid more than anyone for the movie. He was paid $25 million. For his, I suppose you could theoretically call it a performance.
Let's get some ice.
And the final fact is, Mr. Freeze once escaped an insane asylum by using a crayon. It was a red crayon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Please let me know if there's any other Batman villains you want me to talk about, like Poison Ivy or Scarecrow or Two-Face. Let me know and I'll upload a video as soon as possible. To learn more facts, check out my books. They're available on Amazon on paperback and Kindle. Thanks for watching. See you again.